The morning I stepped on the scale and saw 161 pounds, I had to step off and step back on again. 3 times. Because 6 months earlier I had been 204. I stood there in my bathroom in Barry, staring at that number. And I genuinely did not recognize the man looking back at me from the mirror. Hollow cheeks, grey skin, the kind of eyes that looked tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. My daughter had been telling me for weeks that I looked wrong. Not sick, wrong. There's a difference, and she was right. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me go back to where this actually started, because you need to understand that none of this felt like a crisis when it was happening. It crept in the way bad things usually do. Slowly, dressed up as something ordinary. My wife passed in the spring of 2022. 41 years we were married. She was the kind of woman who remembered every birthday in the extended family, who kept a calendar on the fridge with color-coded markers, who could make a pot of soup out of whatever was left in the refrigerator on a Thursday night and somehow make it taste like something she'd been planning for a week. When she died, the house didn't just feel empty. It felt like it had forgotten how to be a house. My son helped me through the worst of it. He drove up from Mississauga almost every weekend that first year. His wife, they'd been married 3 years at that point, would sometimes come with him. Her name was Claudette, French-Canadian background, very put together, always dressed like she was about to go somewhere important, even when she was just sitting at my kitchen table. She and I had never been particularly close. Not cold, just parallel. We existed in the same family without much overlap. She would ask how I was doing in the way people ask when they don't expect a real answer, and I would give her the answer she expected. That changed in the second year. I don't know exactly when it shifted, but at some point Claudette started calling me. Not just when she was with my son, not just as a courtesy. She'd call on Tuesday afternoons, ask how I was sleeping, whether I'd eaten a real meal, whether I'd been to my doctor. At first I thought she was doing it for my son's sake. Maybe he'd asked her to check in. Maybe she was just being kind in that way. People are kind to recently widowed fathers-in-law. I appreciated it. I told my daughter Simone about it once, and she got quiet in the way she gets when she's choosing her words carefully. "That's nice of her," Simone said. She didn't say it warmly. "You don't like her," I said. I didn't say that. But she had, more or less. Simone had never said anything specific about Claudette, just small things over the years. The way Claudette once made a comment about the house, suggesting I could probably get a good price for it if I ever wanted to simplify. The way she'd asked once, over Christmas dinner, whether I'd updated my will after my wife passed. Simone had mentioned that one quietly to me afterward, and I'd brushed it off. Claudette was practical. Some people are just practical. My son Russell was oblivious to most of this. He's a good man, kind, hard-working, the type who assumes the best in people because that's genuinely how he moves through the world. He trusted his wife completely, and I trusted him. So by extension, I extended something like trust to her too. In the fall of 2023, Claudette told me she'd found something she thought I'd love. She said her colleague's father had one, and swore by it. A full-body massage recliner. The kind with heat settings, multiple programs, built into a proper leather chair that looked like real furniture rather than a medical device. She said she wanted to get it for me as a gift, to help with my back. I mentioned once, maybe twice, that my lower back had been bothering me since I'd started sleeping on the wrong side of the bed after my wife died. I'd moved to the center and somehow wrecked my alignment. I told her she didn't have to do that. She insisted. The chair arrived 2 weeks later, delivered and set up by 2 men in a company van. It was beautiful, actually. Dark brown leather, solid-looking, with a small remote that controlled everything. I sat in it that first evening and felt the heat spread across my lower back and thought, this is what getting older should feel like. Something that helps. I used it every day, usually in the evening, after dinner, watching the news or a documentary. Sometimes I'd fall asleep in it and wake up at 11 with the TV still on. My back did feel better at first. Or maybe I just felt better because someone had thought of me. It's hard to separate those two things when you're living alone and winter is coming in Ontario and the nights get long fast. The first sign came about 3 weeks in. I woke up one morning with a rash on my forearm. Just a small patch, red and slightly raised. I put some cream on it, the kind my wife used to keep in the medicine cabinet, and thought nothing of it. A few days later there was another patch, this time on the back of my neck. I assumed I'd changed my laundry detergent recently, or maybe I was reacting to something. I was 63. The body starts misfiring. By December, I was tired in a way I couldn't explain. Not the tired that comes from poor sleep, but a heaviness behind the eyes, a thickness in my limbs when I tried to stand up. I went to my doctor, Dr. Okafor at the clinic on Dunlop Street, and she ran some blood work. Everything came back borderline. A few things slightly elevated, a few things slightly low. She adjusted my blood pressure medication and told me to watch my diet. I went home and watched my diet. It didn't help. Claudette called twice a week now. Sometimes she'd offer to bring food or suggest supplements she'd read about. She'd ask whether I was still using the chair. "You're not stopping, are you? It's supposed to take a few months to really feel the difference." Once, when I mentioned to my son that I was thinking of moving the chair to the spare room because I wanted to try sleeping in my actual bed again through the whole night, Claudette got on the phone. Russell had handed it to her and talked me out of it for 20 minutes. She said the chair's routine was important, that the therapeutic benefit was cumulative, that her colleague's father had almost quit too, and then had the best winter of his life once he pushed through. I kept the chair where it was. Simone came to visit in January. She stood in the doorway of my living room and looked at me, and her face did something she tried to hide. She sat with me for the whole weekend, and on the last evening she said, "Dad, who gave you that chair?" I told her. She was quiet for a moment. "And before the chair, were you this tired?" I thought about it. "Not this tired." "Were you losing weight before the chair?" "A bit. After your mother." "Dad." She was looking at me very steadily. "I want you to stop using it. I want you to stop using it." I told her she was being dramatic. I told her Claudette had been nothing but good to me this past year. I told her she'd never liked Claudette, and this felt like an excuse. Simone didn't argue. She just said, "I'm asking you as your daughter. Please just stop for a month and see." I didn't. I don't know why. Maybe I didn't want to be the kind of man who gets scared by his own furniture. Maybe I didn't want Simone to be right about Claudette, because if she was right about that, what else had I missed? Maybe I was just tired, and the chair was warm and changing. Anything felt like too much. By March, I was down to 178 pounds. I had seen 3 different doctors at that point. One suggested fibromyalgia. One thought it might be a sleep disorder and referred me to a specialist. Dr. Okafor, to her credit, kept running tests and kept looking baffled. She asked me once if anything in my home environment had changed recently. I said no. It didn't even occur to me. That's what I have to sit with. The chair was just furniture by that point. It had been there for 5 months. It was part of the house. What changed everything was a tear in the armrest. It appeared sometime in late March, a small split in the leather along the inner edge of the right armrest. I didn't want it getting worse, so I called around to a few upholstery repair shops and found a man who worked out of a small garage workshop in Innisfil, about 20 minutes south. He'd been reupholstering and restoring furniture for over 30 years. When I described the chair over the phone, the brand, the model, the integrated heating elements, he said he knew exactly what to do and came the following Saturday morning. His name was Roger, probably mid-50s, methodical, the kind of man who takes his time and doesn't say anything unless he means it. He looked at the chair for a long time before he started. He ran his hands along the seams, checked the base, felt around the back. Then he stopped. "How long have you had this chair?" he asked. "Since October." He was quiet. He turned it slightly. The chair was on a swivel base and looked at the back panel, the section that rests against the wall. He pressed along the edges with his thumbs. Then he said, "Can I show you something?" He had a small pry tool in his kit. He worked it along a seam at the lower back panel, a section that was designed to look decorative, a strip of darker leather inset about 8 inches wide. The seam hadn't been factory sealed, it had been resealed. You couldn't tell from the front, but from the back, once you knew what you were looking at, you could see it. The stitching was different. Slightly tighter, slightly less even than the original. He eased the panel open. Inside, nestled against the heating element, right where the heat would activate and circulate through the system, was a packet. Wrapped in thin plastic, then a layer of cheesecloth, then more plastic. About the size of a paperback book. He didn't touch it with his bare hands. He looked at me and said quietly, "I think you need to call someone." I called Simone first. She didn't say, "I told you so." She just said she was on her way. What the forensic toxicologist later identified was a compound derived from a plant source, a mixture that included extracts of white snakenut, the same plant that caused milk sickness on the frontier, combined with other organic compounds chosen specifically because they produce cumulative toxicity through skin absorption and inhalation when activated by heat. Over time, with daily exposure, the effects include fatigue, weight loss, skin reactions, and eventually liver and kidney deterioration. It was not a commercial product. It had been prepared. The person who prepared it had done research. I will tell you that when the detective who handled the case showed me the evidence report and explained what had been building up in my system for 5 months, I did not feel angry at first. I felt confused. Confused in the specific way you feel when something reorganizes your understanding of your own life. I had to go back through the past year and look at everything through a different lens. And it was exhausting and nauseating in a way that had nothing to do with the toxins. The chair had been purchased through Claudette's name, from a private seller, no warranty, no retail record. The compound inside had her fingerprints on the interior plastic, partial prints on the cheesecloth. Her search history on a personal laptop, obtained under warrant, included the relevant plant names, preparation methods, absorption rates through leather, heat activation of alkaloid compounds. She had been thorough. She had been patient. She had been, in her way, very intelligent. What she had not counted on was a tear in the armrest, and a furniture restorer who had seen enough in 30 years to know when a seam didn't look right. The investigation also turned up documents that clarified the motive more clearly than I ever wanted it to be clear. My wife's estate had been worth considerably more than most people knew, a mix of her family property and the Cowarthas inherited years ago, our joint investments, and a life insurance policy that had appreciated beyond what we'd originally projected. Together, somewhat over $1.4 million. My son was the primary heir, which meant Claudette had a direct and substantial interest in my dying sooner rather than later. She had apparently been under the impression, based on something Russell had said, that I was also considering leaving a significant portion to a heritage conservation charity my wife had supported, a decision Claudette had apparently calculated that would reduce what remained for Russell. Russell did not know. I want to be clear about that. My son did not know. The look on his face when the detective told him, "That's something I will never be able to unsee." He called me that night and he couldn't speak properly for the first few minutes, and I told him that I didn't blame him, and I meant it completely. He had loved a woman who turned out to be something different underneath, and that is its own kind of loss. I know something about losing a person you thought you understood. Claudette was charged with aggravated assault causing bodily harm and administration of a noxious substance with intent to endanger life under the Criminal Code. Given the deliberate preparation, the duration of exposure, and the forensic evidence, the Crown pushed for the maximum. She was convicted on both counts at trial in the fall of 2024 and sentenced to 17 years. Her lawyer appealed on procedural grounds. The appeal was dismissed. I spent 4 months in active medical treatment after the chair was removed. My liver enzymes took a long time to normalize. I lost more weight before I started gaining it back. There was a period in there, probably April and May of that year, where I was genuinely not sure how much was permanent damage and how much would resolve. Dr. Okafor, once she understood what she'd been looking at, became one of the most thorough physicians I've ever encountered. I owe her a lot. I'm at 196 pounds now, still not quite back to where I was, but the doctor says the remaining deficit is more about age than injury at this point. My back still bothers me sometimes. I do not own a recliner. Simone calls me every Sunday. Has done for years, but now we talk longer. We talk about her mother sometimes, and about Russell, who is doing better, slowly, and about the house and the garden and the particular way March feels in Barry, when the lake ice is breaking up and the light comes back at angles you'd forgotten about. I think about Roger, the upholstery man, more than he would probably expect. I've sent him a card. I've told him what he found and what it meant. He wrote back in the way tradespeople sometimes write. Short, practical, no fuss. He said he was glad I was okay. He said he'd seen a lot of furniture in 30 years, and that chair had never sat right with him from the moment he walked in. I believe him. Some people just know in their hands and their gut when something has been altered from what it was meant to be. The hardest thing about all of this is not what Claudette did exactly. The hardest thing is the year before the chair, when she was calling twice a week and I thought she had finally decided to let me in. I thought I had been wrong about her, all those years of parallel existence. I thought I had misjudged her. There is a particular kind of loneliness that makes you want to believe that, and she knew exactly how to find it. I will not let anyone use that door again without earning it slowly, over time, through the ordinary accumulation of small, honest things. That is what my wife gave me in 41 years, and it's the measure I should have kept. The scale in my bathroom reads 196 now. I step on it sometimes just to watch the number hold. I think about the scale a lot. Not the number on it now, but the morning I stepped on it and saw 161, and had to look away. There's something about a number like that, concrete, silent, indifferent, that cuts through all the stories you've been telling yourself. I'd been telling myself that I was grieving, that I was adjusting, that bodies do strange things after loss. All of that was true. None of it was the whole truth. What I have come to understand is that consequences don't announce themselves. Claudette didn't walk into my life looking like someone capable of what she did. She walked in looking like someone who had finally decided to care, and I accepted it because I wanted it to be real, and because wanting something to be real is one of the ways we make ourselves vulnerable to people who have studied exactly that want. That's the part that took me the longest to forgive in myself, not the naivety, but the stubbornness after. Simone stood in my living room and asked me 2 careful questions, and I chose my pride over her concern. I told myself she'd never liked Claudette. I made her worry into a personality flaw so I didn't have to act on it. That is not a small thing. That is a failure of judgment I have to own completely, and owning it is the only way it becomes useful rather than just painful. I was lucky. Roger walked in on a Saturday morning with 30 years of knowledge in his hands and something in his gut that said, this seam isn't ripe. Most people who get played the long game don't get a Roger. They just keep losing weight and seeing doctors who can't find anything, and eventually the body gives out and everyone calls it natural causes and moves on. I got a tear in the armrest. I got a man who noticed. What I carry forward from all of this is something I can only describe as a harder kind of honesty. With myself, mostly. The honesty to admit when someone's concern arrives too conveniently. The honesty to listen to my daughter even when listening means I was wrong. The honesty to look at a person's actions across years rather than just across the past few months, because people who intend you harm are often very patient about getting into position first. Russell is rebuilding. It's slow and it's not linear, and some weeks are harder than others. But he calls. We watch hockey games over the phone sometimes, not saying much, just existing in the same hour from two different cities. That matters more than I would have thought. And Simone, I don't have the right words for what she gave me by not saying, "I told you so." She just said she was on her way. That kind of grace, the kind that shows up without needing to be right about it, is what I want to be capable of for the rest of the years I have. The chair is gone. The house feels like mine again. I step on that scale some mornings, just to watch the number hold steady. It's a small thing, but after everything, steady feels like enough.